Welcome to Inside the Sports Car Paddock for June 19th. Apologize for missing a week last week. Honestly, with so much 24 hours of Le Mans content flowing through on our Marshall Pruitt podcast, I figured it might be worth waiting and rolling out a rather fun and interesting conversation that I had with my friend and fellow race engineer, Jeff Braun, Jeff being the far more talented between the two of us. So the conversation we had, which we were hoping to roll out leading into the 24 Hours of Le Mans, but it still works just as well the week after, is on the subject of simulation and knowing how both PC, computer-based simulation, something that is crunching and calculating potential setup information and component changes and outputting information that can be used to, through virtual means, predict whether something will or will not work in terms of a performance improvement. And the other aspect, the one that's probably most widely known and understood, the actual driver in the loop simulation, sitting in some sort of multi-axis driver simulator with multiple screens in front of the driver, simulating the track that they are, whichever has been selected to try and test on. So with Jeff, we get into both facets, both driver in the loop, just regularly referred to as simulation, and then the other, the computer-based, that we just tend to call sim. So I wish there was something more elaborate to distinguish one from the other, but sim and simulation, or DIL, driver in the loop, those are the two main topics that we open with Jeff Braun, the supreme race engineer for the Core Autosport IMSA team. And then we close the conversation I had with Ben Keating about 24 hours after learning that his victory at Le Mans in the GTE-Am class had been taken away. Really thankful to Ben for taking the time to have this conversation. As you can hear, emotion is still definitely there. There's even one point where I wanted to try and steer things away when I could tell that it's starting to get a little bit misty-eyed, as you can probably understand, as someone who had a dream of winning Le Mans, won Le Mans, and then did not win Le Mans. And I hope you will also appreciate Ben's candor as well in talking about where the blame should fall, etc., etc. So technical stuff, as we always open with, try and educate you a little bit, educate me as well here on Inside the Sports Car Paddock with Jeff Braun. Then we close with Ben on some pretty heavy stuff and pretty raw and honest stuff, and then you'll hear some music and we will fade out. If you get a chance, check out our new MarshallPruittPodcast.com site, where we have all 500 plus episodes. We're just about, I believe this is going to be episode 600, and also in terms of fun milestones, we just crossed 3 million downloads since we launched the podcast in May of 2016. So another fun little milestone. All thanks to you, and all thanks to our guests that have made this little after hours project of mine a thing. So I hope you enjoy this here with Jeff, then Ben, and then we will speak to you next week with more interviews on Inside the Sports Car Paddock, brought to you by Cooper Tires and the Justice Brothers. Jeff Braun, we are back for, we're back, but we're also here for our very first Inside the Sports Car Paddock opening conversation during the 24 Hours of Le Mans. So knowing that this arduous, crazy, just wear you out 24-hour race is such a true pillar of the motor racing calendar, it's really easy to talk about drivers and cars, and all those things are super cool and super amazing. That's what folks are going to watch going around for 24 hours this weekend in France. You said, hey, let's talk about the thing folks don't see, and that is the really super hardcore technical preparation that takes place before a 24 Hours of Le Mans or Daytona or, frankly, any major race, and that involves simulation. That involves race pretending at a very fine and high engineering and technical art. We've had a lot of folks request the two of us to get into this, and so this seems to me like the perfect opportunity. Do you want to start by just explaining what simulation is and the fact that there's actually two forms of simulation? There's what folks commonly refer to as sim, just an abbreviation, which is usually computer crunching based. And then there's simulation, which is often or more readily describing the driver in the loop style that folks would see of someone sitting in a, could be a real chassis or not, but actual pretend driving, the highest form of pretend driving to learn. But maybe you can explain what simulation is, the purpose that it serves, and how there are two distinct forms of it.
Yes, it's simulation has become, and I know a lot of fans hear about it, and it's kind of like, well, what does that mean? Is it like the drivers get a subscription to iRacing and they go race each other in simulated races and things like that? Well, that's certainly come a long way. The commercially available to the average person simulations have come a long way, but what we're doing from an engineering standpoint is quite a bit more sophisticated. We have what we call a lap sim, which is basically you have a model of your car, a computer model, and when I say model, I don't mean like a plastic model. It's lines of code. If you looked at the model, it would be just gibberish. Lines of code that describe the vehicle dynamics, the aerodynamics, the motion paths, the inertias, all the dynamics of a car is described in computer code. And once you have that model built, then you can use racetracks that are also modeled by laser scanning very accurately, not only the corner radiuses and the elevation, but the actual surface texture, the angle of the curbs, the height of the curbs, the bumps, and those are laser scanned and very expensive models of the tracks. Then you combine your simulation model, your vehicle dynamics model, with your track model in a computer. You basically put a setup on the car that you want, just like we would with a regular setup, a regular setup sheet with springs and sway bars and wing angles and all your damper settings and everything. And you hit a button and the computer virtually runs a lap of the track that's laser scanned in and using your vehicle dynamics model. And what you get out as an output is the exact data traces that you get out from your data system from the real car. So if you're using Motec, for instance, you get Motec graphs out of throttle, steering, brake, ride heights, suspension movements, all the things that you would from the regular car. And of course, you get a lap time. And, you know, a lot of people would think the lap time is the most important, but what's more important is knowing what kind of ride heights we'll run, what kind of shock velocities we'll get, what kind of vehicle movements we'll get, pitch and roll and things like that. And then we can go back in and change other setups and see if we get less pitch, more corner speed, less or more roll. And you can kind of run through some setup changes in your lap simulation to get a kind of test inside the computer. Now, we don't have a driver who's steering it, so this is just theoretical, what should generate the most grip, the least drag, the most downforce, and make the car better with an ideal driver. So that's kind of the lap sim. It takes a long time to develop those simulation models. You're constantly checking your output that you get from the simulation model in the computer with real data. So you can actually overlay them just as if, let's say you're at Watkins Glen and you test and you have a bunch of data. You come back and you will run the same setup that you ran on the racetrack in the lap sim. You'll get an output that looks just like a lap that you ran on the track, but it is a virtual lap. And you can lay that over just like you would two actual racetrack laps. You can lay it over the actual racetrack lap and see how they compare and see where the differences are. That allows you to kind of tweak your model to be more accurate. We call it correlation. You're trying to correlate the sim model with the actual race car. And that kind of starts to put some of the driver technique into it so that it's more accurate. And as your correlation gets better and better and better throughout the year, or whenever, as you're building and improving your model, then you can have more faith in the results from the simulation. And so that's what people will be doing, like before Le Mans here. Le Mans is a great example that you brought up. You can't test there very much. So, you can't just rent Le Mans for the weekend and go test. So a lot of simulation work will be done. And the teams that'll have the best simulation will have the best, most accurate models of both the track and the car.
And what makes this so important in modern day competition is, unlike, let's actually switch out of sports cars for a moment, because this actually draws directly from your experience and my own, and that's the Indianapolis 500, especially the way it used to be run in the 80s and 90s, where there was 3 weeks of practice. Well, with qualifying thrown in, but multiple weekends of qualifying, approximately 3 weeks of practice. And so for a new team coming in, say for a new team appearing at Le Mans, you'd show up with absolutely no idea on what you needed for a chassis setup to be successful there. But the calendar, as it was structured, if we're just using this Indy 500 example, there was enough time where you could start off with a very basic, very comfortable, very safe setup and work your way towards something that would be competitive. You're going to start with a ride height that's comfy, springs, anti-roll bars, wings. Again, the thing's going to understeer. Boy, just no issues. We've got time to shape this thing towards success. You think about Le Mans, you could even, again, if they had multiple weeks, Jeff, you could indeed do what we always do as engineers, and that's take little strolls up and down pit lane, try not to be too obvious with the camera, but, get some looks at what the other cars are doing. Hey, this is their wing angle. You can't tell everything, but, if a car is sitting there with the nose off of it and the wheels off, you get a vague idea for either camber or toe if the things are pointed straight. But anyways, you can glean a little bit of info from the other cars, but time is the one thing that you use to your advantage if you lack information. Well, in the modern era, knowing that, as you mentioned, there is one Le Mans test day, you get a single day to try and prove, learn, you name it, simulation, as you mentioned, this effectively input the setup information you want to try, hit the proverbial button, and out it spits laps of information that tell you whether it has generated what you're looking for or not. This has become your 24-hour a day, 365-day a year invitation to test at Le Mans to make up for that time that you don't have.
Absolutely. And the great thing about it is, in addition to that testing, it's actually cheaper because you're not throwing sets of tires on it every 45 minutes. You're not burning fuel. You're not wearing out your gearbox and your engines. You didn't ship your crew to France. You didn't ship your cars to France. And the simulations have become so good now that the information is super valuable. And some teams, I know some of the Formula One teams have actually said that if they were going to ban one thing or reduce one thing for costs and things like that, they would rather ban or reduce on-track testing than simulation testing, because the simulation testing is so good in Formula One that it's become more accurate than track testing. And people would say, how can that be? The big thing is you can control, in the simulation, the environment is controlled. It's not like you go out in real life, you go out and it's a little warmer or the sun came over. Indy's a great example. The cloud cover comes over and suddenly the track's 2 miles an hour faster. Well, how do you know what setup is going to work when? And, if you just made a change to your car and you went out and the driver goes, yeah, that's better, and the speeds are up, is it because turn one is now in the shade and it wasn't 20 minutes ago before you made the change. In the simulation, you can control and hold all those variables consistent. You can hold tire wear consistent in a simulation. You can have it reset to brand new tires every time you cross the start finish line, or keep it on old tires, or whatever you want. So the key is then, once you have all of that, is now add the driver in, because when it gets right down to it, your lap sim can be perfectly accurate, and it's perfect from a technical standpoint with whatever the ideal driver is, if there is one. But we have real drivers driving these cars, and they like different things. So then the next step from the lap sim is what you talked about, the driver in the loop simulator. And for people that haven't seen them, it's basically, most people have seen like a flight simulator that airline pilots or fighter pilots would train in. It's exactly the same thing, but for race cars. So they're very sophisticated machines that, the ones we're using cost anywhere from $3 or $4 million to $10 million machine. And there's a couple different kinds, but they all do the same thing. The driver sits in the machine. The cockpit is very similar to the car that they're driving, with the same steering wheel, the same controls, the same vision and everything. And that vehicle dynamics model that we talked about in the lap sim is the model that drives the driver in the loop simulator. So it moves the car, the simulated car, it moves the chassis and the driver similar, not exactly, because we can't create G-forces. We're not in a centrifuge where we're spinning the driver at some G-forces. So but it moves the driver to actually trick him into thinking that the movement and the feel is like the real car. And the sim guys call it motion cueing. So you're giving the driver cues, and there's a lot of neurosurgeon or neurologists and stuff that study how the brain and the body take in these cues and how they feel them. And the simulator, if you watch it from the outside, a driver in the loop simulator, it looks like the motion can't be right because it's moving. When you put on the brakes, it's moving backwards. When it moves the car, you're like, it doesn't look like a real car. And it isn't like a real car, but it's tricking the driver's brain and all of his senses into feeling like the real car. So you use all this motion cueing and this very kind of complex movement of the car, plus the wraparound video screens, and the auditory is actually recorded from the real car, so it sounds like it. They have big subwoofers in the back of the seat to actually shake and move the car, like the vibrations that are felt from the gearbox and the tires and all of that. The steering is all non-linear and loaded based on the downforce and the tire model and all of that. And so we do the same thing. The driver just drives laps, and just like you would testing, but he's driving this sim model, and we're getting data out of it just like we would with the real car. And we can then hold things consistent. Every time he comes by start finish, he gets a new set of tires. So he's running on sticker tires all the time, or used tires all the time. You can also, huge benefit of the driver in the loop sim is you can make changes quickly. Let's say at the real track, you wanted to make a differential change in the number of friction surfaces or ramps or settings in the differential. Well, you'd have to take the gearbox apart, essentially, take the differential out, rebuild the differential, put it back in, put the whole gearbox back in, add oil. You're looking at an hour change there.
Yeah, it's the amount of time required, as we've spoken on in previous episodes, probably the one centering on testing. How do you choose what to do? How do you manage the time? This is one of those things where if you know you have a one-day test somewhere and you are changing diff ramp angles and whatnot, oh boy, you're eating up. You're spending more time off track than you are on track.
On track. It just suspension geometry changes where you got to take all the wishbones off the car and put new brackets on and move the brackets or something. And it's just a long, long process. Well, here, if in the driver in the loop simulator, the driver just hits pause, and you talk about it. He's in a room where the machine is, and myself as the race engineer, and maybe a vehicle dynamics guy, and the operator of the sim is in another room with a glass wall, but we're on a headset together, and we can say, hey, let's try this other different. And you basically, a couple keystrokes, hit go, and in 20 seconds, you've made what would take an hour change on the race car at the racetrack, and you can go try it. The other great thing about a driver in the loop simulator is, let's say, pick a corner, turn 17 at Sebring, important corner. Driver can go through turn 17, get on the front straightaway, and just hit back. And what it'll do is it'll back him up a predetermined amount of seconds. And let's say you hit back and it backs him up 20 seconds. So now he's back on the straightaway leading into turn 17. And he can go through 17 and he can hit back and it'll back him up. And he can do 10 turn 17s in a row in 2 minutes and just work on turn 17 if it's something that he wants to try different lines, or he wants to feel it. I've made a change and he wants to feel if it's better, and he goes, oh, I think so. But instead of having to wait another 2 minutes to get back to turn 17, he can just go through turn 17 10 times and go, yeah, for sure, that's better. And here's what I like about it. So the driving the loop thing has become hugely, hugely important, and the wave of the future. Well, actually, not the wave of the future, the wave of the present. If you don't have a program like that at a top level, for sure, Formula One, IndyCar, LMP1, a lot of LMP2 teams are using it now, who have commercially available driving the loop simulators to them. It's become required. You have to have it.
Let's close, Jeff, on your tales of the Level 5 D Sports Racing program as told in a special edition of our dear friends Dinner with Racers show a couple years ago. I mean, I hate to say it, Jeff. You could win Le Mans overall. You could win the Indy 500 overall, Daytona 500. You could win Monaco overall. I think your Dinner with Racers special edition Level 5 D Sports Racer episode is going to be the thing you're best known for. But that's not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing. You know this. You've accepted this.
Sure.
And then last year, it was late July, August of last year, you and I sat down you had a great idea where we sat down for about an hour and recorded a podcast on the technical aspects of this. So the Dinner with Racers episode, if you haven't listened to it, friends, please find it. But you said, hey, that was great and it was fun storytelling, but maybe we should sit down and talk about the finer aspects of just the technical stuff. So I still have to get that podcast produced. You sent over a bunch of other amazing material to look through, maybe to use in conjunction with that for a story. But this driver in the loop thing that was used to make this D Sports Racer club racing car effectively an LMP2-ish type machine. I don't know. It might not have been far off of LMP1 in terms of outright performance at Road America. That's really you thought might be a fun thing to close on here, in how using driver in the loop, even for a frickin' club racing car, boy, the effects are amazing.
Exactly. I mean, it's kind of, and I think I can tell this story right now, and if I can't, I'm going to tell it anyway. But so we Level 5 had a fantastic working relationship on the vehicle dynamics side with Multimatic. We were running the Acura Worth LMP2 cars at the time, and they were our chosen vehicle dynamics simulation partners. And so they're the ones who had a driver and loop simulator in Toronto at their facility up there. They also have the capability and the super smart brainiac people that can help build this simulation model, computer code model that we were talking about. And so we had those guys working on the P2 program to provide us the simulation program. So I could go up to Toronto with my drivers. We could test for 2 or 3 days before, or maybe a couple days before each event, before each IMSA event. We'd test on the simulator, then we'd go to the race. Before the next race, we'd go test on the simulator, go to the race. So we would have a couple days worth of simulator testing before every race. But when it came down time to build this D Sports Racer, it was a brand new car. It was your proverbial blank sheet of paper. And so what Multimatic wanted to do was perfect their use of simulator in not just refining a current car, but building a race car from scratch. And what we didn't know at the time was that the Ford GT project was underway, or shortly to become underway, and that Multimatic would be involved heavily in the design of the race car and the development of the race car. So what they wanted to do was kind of use our D Sports Racer as a test case of how do you have a blank sheet of paper and design a race car that you know is going to perform properly and at a high level in the virtual world. You know, in the past, the designer comes up, he's got his ideas, he's got his experience of a bunch of other people, and they go on the CAD program and they design what they think and they put it in metal and carbon fiber. They go to the racetrack and it works pretty darn good if you got good designers, but they have to change this and they need a different this, and this is a problem, so we got to rebuild this and remake this part, and maybe it needs new suspension or whatever. Long process to get it super refined. What we did on the D Sports Racer and what was then refined and used to do the Ford GT was that same process. Designed the car with smart designers like Brian Willis, designed the car. Great. Now we have a car. But what he did is he designed 3 other suspensions that he thought could be pretty good. Mark Hanford worked on the aerodynamics, and he came up with what he thought was the best aerodynamics, but came along with 3 others that he thought might be pretty good. Our engine guys, same thing. Here's engine curves, here's turbo boost curves, here's engine architectures. Here's what we think is the best. Here's 3 other possibilities. Then we went to the Multimatic Driving the Loop simulator in Toronto. In again a virtual world, we had our model of the best car we thought we had. We bolted Colin in it in the simulator, and he went and drove it at Road America. And it was pretty good, but maybe the other suspension was better. So we hit a couple keystrokes. Suspension number 2 design is on the car immediately, and he drives for a couple, maybe, I don't know, an hour while we try different spring rates and shock rates with that suspension. Then suspension number 3, and then suspension number 4, and then different aero combinations, different wings, different body shapes, all things that would cost tens of thousands of dollars to build in the real world. We were just trying on the simulator. Maybe suspension 2 works really good with aero number 3, but not so good with aero 4. So we tried all sorts of combinations of engine, suspension, and aero together to find which ones were the best. After about a week, maybe 4 days solid of trying all the different things we thought would work, we came up with now what we thought was the best suspension with the best aero, with the best engine combination. In the simulator, we tuned that with shocks and springs and sway bars and wing angles to what we thought was the best. We went, that's it. Not one piece of carbon fiber had been laid up or one piece of metal cut or bent at that point, but we had designed our car after 4 solid days of testing. Then we went and built that car out of carbon fiber and metal and machining and all of that. And then we took it to the track. And the amazing thing to me was we spent another 4 days at the racetrack trying to improve, like you do. You get, it's a brand new car. We'll make it better each time we go out. After 4 days of testing, we raced the car with the exact same spring rates, the exact same sway bar rates, the exact same wing angles. We made a few damper adjustments to the settings, and that's all we could do to make the car better than what we had done on the driver in the loop simulator. So designed the car on the simulator, and that's the same process, more refined, that Multimatic then used to design the Ford GT.
And that, friends, is how a club racing project commissioned by Scott Tucker and the Level 5 team helped Ford to win the 24 Hours of Le Mans in 2016. In part, We're not claiming full credit. We're just saying that it's phenomenal to think how this virtual system, the validation, the working through iteration, the iterative process, but just the driver in the loop certainly didn't start with Multimatic and the DSR program here for Level 5, of course, but just saying, as a firm, amazing to see how going through this process in a club racing effort really did prove, validate, help processes to change or tweak however was needed to get to a point where, when it was time for Multimatic to create the Ford GT racing program and road car, again, from scratch, the ability to do that in a virtual manner for this company really was proven through this DSR effort. Just madness.
Yeah, it's and by now they're way past what we've done, and they're way more refined, and they're certainly not the only ones. I have to believe that every Formula One team is constantly testing updated parts and next year's design, and because the simulations have gotten so good now that it really is actually better than testing on the racetrack. And the big thing was getting a proper tire model, getting a proper vehicle dynamics model, the sophistication and the accuracy with that we can now model the whole car is what's allowed this to happen. And so, it's gone a long way from, we're going to use the simulation so the driver can get a few laps to understand where the track goes. Those days it's moved so fast. That was 10 years ago. And now we're to the point where it's amazing what the simulations can do and how important it is. And you can't win at a high level without it anymore.
Well, thank you as always, my friend. Looking forward to our next episode on who knows what that topic will be.
We'll find something exciting. I still got a long list of things that people have sent in, and it's amazing. Some people say, well, just tell stories. So we could do that too, but it's always good if it has a little bit of a technical bent to it too.
Sounds like a plan.
Howdy, Marshall.
Hey, Ben, how are you?
I'm doing well. I guess about as well as can be expected given the circumstances.
This is probably going to sound like I'm blowing smoke, but I say this in all honesty, just being fortunate to have known you for a little while. I can't think of many folks who would be better equipped to deal with what has happened than you. And that's part of...
Equipped how?
Well, you've got fairly immense character. You are certainly accustomed to deals changing, and you're also someone who has had to build things from the ground up and both accept when they fail and obviously delight when they succeed, compared to maybe some others who are just driven by pure emotion. You seem like someone that, having to deal with a really crappy scenario like this, not like you're happy, go, yay, I get to deal with it, but there are others I'd be more concerned about.
Well, thank you. All of those things are true. It doesn't make it any less emotional, but I have dealt with a lot of bullshit in my life. And when you are managing, leading, 1,500 people and 20 different businesses, you get to deal with a lot of bullshit.
Yeah.
The fact is, I'm someone who, I have a really big distaste for injustice. I am someone who I will be the first person to step up and make a scene and do something stupid when I feel like there has been injustice. And I'll be the first person to step up and take my lumps when it's appropriate. I can, if it were just about the time penalty, then I would be making an argument that some of the hoops we had to jump through might or might not have been justified. However, the fact is, we did our capacity check 3 different times, and we were 0.4 of a liter over capacity. I'm also 100% sure that we checked our capacity before the race, and we were at 96 liters. The only thing that makes sense to me is that the rubber bladder inside the cell, got broken in after being filled and emptied and pressurized and heated and vibrated and all that other stuff over a 24-hour period, enough that it could accept another 400 milliliters. Because I am the first person to be really upset about something being unjust, I would expect nothing less from the stewards. If I were in the position of a team that left a margin of error or did not have a cell that expanded, then I would expect to be moved up. And I can't deny the fact that that I had too much capacity in the car. It seems odd to me that is even appealable, because it is what it is. I know I'm not going to appeal the fact that we had 0.4 liters too much in the tank, because it is what it is. I hate it. I am still proud of the performance that we had. I'm still proud of the team. We have nothing to be ashamed of. We did not gain an advantage by any of this, and none of it was intentional. We we were seriously concerned about our pace versus the other manufacturers. We didn't feel like we had any margin to give, whether that is half a second on fuel fill or whether that is 400 milliliters on capacity.
Sure.
And so, we set everything right at the limit. And I now know that that was a big mistake. I did not, I did not think that those two pieces of equipment would change, and they did. So, it's a tough situation. I even if I go back and win Le Mans again, even if I went back and won Le Mans again, I could never recreate that scenario. The first year, the first privateer effort, the first year to be racing a Ford at Le Mans, which is a brand I'm extremely connected with, to share the victory with Bill Ford. There's so many hundreds of various things that were so special over the weekend, and it's just sad that it went down the way it went down, but it is clearly not an injustice. I had 400 milliliters too much fuel, and I can't argue with that.
The approach that you've taken to this, Ben, I think is one that might surprise some, and I say that based on the amount and style of comments I've seen from so many people about this decision. Some who are hurling big stones at the ACO, the FIA, etc. I guess that's why I opened with saying you have the temperament to be able to look at this rationally, even though it might hurt your heart like you wouldn't believe.
Man, it is. It's still really hard for me to talk about.
I understand, brother. Let's talk about something that made me really happy. And that was a guy by the name of Ben Keating being chased by 47 million time sports car champion, all-time Hall of Famer, even though he's still active, Jörg Bergmeister.
Okay.
And that gap, Ben, that everyone figured, oh boy, he's toast. Yeah, no toast to be had. That was a blast to watch, my friend. Let's forget what happened on Monday.
That's one of the things that makes this so special. That's one of the things that I could never recreate. I raced last year in the Ferrari with Risi, and I felt like I didn't feel like, the fact is we had a team that was capable of winning that race. And we got beaten by the 77 Dempsey Proton Porsche. And at the end of that race, I wrote the strategy for this year's race. I looked at everything we did, and I totally created the script. I came to Le Mans this year with a script. And I know exactly how I wanted to do it, and that is what we did. And that is that, I ran my silver and my gold for the first 15 hours of the race. in theory, if you look at the math and you talk about the theory of the way the safety cars work there, you should have just as good of a chance of catching up to a car that you've lost time to as you have of losing time to a car that's in front of you.
Sure.
And even though that's true, I still felt like it was important to try to get up front as early as possible. And that was the approach we took. And, we didn't get a 2-minute lead because our fuel fill was half a second too quick. We got a 2-minute lead because we caught 3 safety cars in a row ahead of our competition. We just hit it right, 3 safety cars in a row. Through the night, Felipe and Jerome just ran consistent laps. We did not have the ultimate fast lap speed, but we had consistent laps. Then I had to do 6 hours of driving within the last 9 hours of the race. The beauty of that was that, I didn't have the pressure. We had a 2-minute lead, and all I had to do was make sure that I didn't make a mistake. We had the end of the safety car, 4-lap safety car. My tires had cooled down. I had 19 pounds of pressure in them. And I came over the radio and I said, guys, this car is going to be a really difficult car to drive when we go green again. I'm going to be really careful. And in turn 1, a P2 came on the inside of me. I got out in the trash and I was backwards before I knew it. Into the gravel. And I thought, man, that could have been it right there. I was lucky enough to go in backwards and still be pointed downhill, and I was able to drive out. What I had to do was to just run consistent, clean laps, which, I ran 359s, basically at 358s, 359s, 4 minutes, consistently just ran those kind of laps and kept my nose clean. In that last stint, I needed an extra 4 minutes to be able to pass the 6-hour mark. We were hoping that in my last double stint that I would get a safety car or a full course yellow or a slow zone or something that would extend my stint. And it was green the whole time. So I didn't get the benefit of that. And so, I had to go into full fuel save mode. And I had to save 10% of a lap per lap, every lap, in order to extend my stint length out long enough that I could make my minimum time. During that stint was when we were forced to come in and change the nose on the car. I don't agree with that decision. I don't know what was behind all that stuff.
One of the most bizarre things, Ben, and I've spoken with many folks who were in the event, in your class, trying to beat you, have told me, yeah, we can't really figure that one out. I have a theory that they were hoping to have you lose enough time to, I have a theory that they saw the refueling times during the event, came to a conclusion late in the event. We're thinking, well, how can we have a quote, in-race penalty that isn't an actual published penalty? I'm not saying there's any validity to it. That's the only thing I can think of.
I might agree with you, but it does me no good to make those type of accusations because it's all irrelevant.
Oh, no. Again,
because
that's
I had
me 100%
too much fuel.
Yep, that's me, not you saying that.
The fact is, I had to come in and change the nose, and then I left, and in the hurry of leaving, I didn't drag the clutch enough, and spun the tires, IMSA style, and then I get a penalty for spinning the tires. And I have to do a stop and go, I was still able to do the 3:59 and 4-minute laps that I had done all morning long. Even though I was saving fuel, I was just doing a lot of coasting into the braking areas and really managing the aero balance on the car and going fast through the corners and maintaining a lap time while still saving a ton of fuel. And I come out of the pits after the penalty, and Bill comes on the radio and says, "Ben, I'm sorry about all this, but I think we still have a chance." And of course, I've been in the car for 2 hours. I have no idea what in the world is going on. But I've known Bill long enough to read his tone of voice. And my response to that was, "What in the hell does that mean?" And he said, he comes over the radio and he says, "Well, Jörg Bergmeister is 5 seconds behind you, and you still need to finish your minimum time." And I said, "Well, Bill, do I need to keep saving fuel?" And he said, "No." And so, I got the opportunity to switch gears. All of a sudden I went from saving the car and being ultra conservative to qualifying mode. I went into a mode of I've got to get every ounce of time out of this car I can get out of the car, because I'm expecting that Jörg is 3 seconds a lap faster than me. I've got to do another 4 laps, and this race is on my shoulders. And I mean, it was one of the most exciting 15 minutes of my career. To be able to put the hammer down when it counted and keep it out of the gravel pit, and to be able to do those fast lap times when it counted was really special. And when we came in, did the stop, Jerome went out. I was able to put him in a position where we had a 3-second lead, with 42 minutes left to go in the race. One of the things that made the race so special was that I personally, clearly and obviously contributed to the result.
And that is something that can't be taken away, because that has nothing to do with trophies or podiums or anything else. Well, let's close on this, Ben. How do you move forward from this? And there's a couple of caveats in the question. So this Le Mans race, kind of a big deal. I think folks have heard about it a little bit, but this isn't the only thing you're doing for the year. You've obviously been participating in and have the rest of your WeatherTech Sports Car Championship GTD effort with Bill Riley to complete. So that's definitely something that's coming up here soon for you, a continuation of that. You obviously have this beautiful Ford GT. I'm not going to ask you what you're going to do with it next because you've been asked that 1,000 times. But
I don't know yet.
But you also have Wins, right, as your sponsor, which that I'm sure wasn't a conversation you wanted to have. But this to me just seems like it might be different from some other drivers / owners who've flown home from Le Mans, looked at the calendar, said, cool, that's the next thing, and their mind and hearts are completely clear. Sounds like you got a little bit of stuff to work through, though.
I'm going to finish the year in IMSA in the AMG. I have the fire inside of me to win, to perform at the highest level is brighter than it was a week ago. I am more driven. I am more passionate, and I am more. I just have a deep fire that wasn't there a week ago. A week ago it was a dream to win Le Mans, and I came in with a good strategy, and it was, let's get a lead, let's hopefully catch some safety cars in the right way, and then I can get in the car and just not screw it up. It's different today. Today I just want to go kick some ass, just because it'll make me feel better. I don't know what the future holds, other than I will continue racing. And I've got to keep reminding myself that this is my recreation. This is supposed to be fun.
You sure picked a funny form of golf to relax with,
right,
there, Ben.
Right, that's exactly how I agree. But golly, if you didn't have all the hardship, then the sweet times wouldn't be as sweet. I've had a really good conversation this morning with Patrick Lindsay. I am
classy character,
very thrilled for him. He was just top notch, first class in the way he dealt with the situation, a lot of people have shown their true colors, and usually that phrase has a bad connotation, and I'm saying that in this case it almost always has a good connotation. There have been a lot of people who are fierce competitors who have been very supportive. I couldn't believe it. I got a phone call last night at home from Bill Ford, which was a great conversation. I got a phone call out of the blue this afternoon from Alan Mullally, who is retired from Ford, but he spent the money to buy the stream, and he watched 13 hours of the race by himself at home, and he was thrilled to see our result, and he wanted me to know that I should hold my head high for the way I represented Ford Motor Company, and that stuff is so important. It's awesome.
I hope, Ben, dealing with this sorrow, knowing that you're not blaming anyone, there's no targeting of the organizers or anything else from your end, but I hope despite the results of what have happened here, I hope you have seen the outpouring of care for you from a lot of folks you probably have never met via whatever social media platforms. There's just a lot of folks who clearly have been impressed or touched or moved in some way by your efforts. And it didn't just start at Le Mans last weekend. That's clearly something you fostered over the years.
Well, that is definitely something I have felt and seen, and it's been very moving. It's been awesome. There's definitely some sort of a silver lining in this whole deal. The best way I can relate to this whole thing is it feels like a death in the family. That's the most similar way I can describe. It's the only other time I've felt like this. It is what it is. You can't ask why. You can't you can't have a redo. You can't appeal it. But it still sucks. But it's also amazing to see the support of people, those that you know and those that you don't. It has been awesome.
Thank you for taking some time, my friend. I know folks are going to appreciate hearing from you and realizing that in the midst of something like this, which as a sportsman, you never want to be in the midst of it, there are ways of dealing with it that can not only make yourself, but your family and those you work around you proud. And when you've got the Ford family and past Ford executives calling you, you're doing something right. So hopefully you're setting track records and destroying the somewhat new asphalt at Watkins Glen coming up here very soon. Ben's going to be on a tear, boys and girls. Leave him a lane of his own, okay? He's got a couple issues to work out from France. Not your fault. Just understand.
Well, I woke up at 3 a.m. this morning, and I got on my bicycle, and I went out for a 20-mile ride on a route that I've done 1,000 times. And I got on Strava, which is like a Facebook for exercise. I got the KOM, the King of the Mountain, and I titled the ride, "There's Nothing Like Some Unresolved Emotions to help you achieve a win."
200-mile-an-hour therapy brought to you by Ben Keating, boys and girls.
Yes.
Ben, thanks again, my friend.
Thank you.